Hey, Curtis, man, you see that creepy house on the hill over there?
Yeah, the one that's way up in the back, recessed and in between the trees?
Yeah, yeah. We should go inside
Why do you want to do that?
because it's October. It's Halloween. Spookiness abounds. We should spend the night in there.
The night? No, 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 no. I've seen that movie way too many times.
All right, how about this instead? Let's go talk with author Todd Brown about a spooky house for his new book, When Shadows Burn. We get to talk all about the Scott House and the horrifying things that happen there, the town of Ravens Cross, and so much more.
Citywide blackout starts right now.
Don't wanna go in there, though.
Welcome to Citywide Blackout with your hosts, Max Bowen and Curtis Hughes. With years of experience in journalism, music, and entertainment business, they put their knowledge to work, bringing you the best in-depth, fun, and sometimes outrageously bizarre interviews with authors, musicians, and many other creators from around the world. With the right amount of gusto and a few F-bombs thrown in for emphasis, you're sure to have a good time. So put up your feet, grab a beverage, and let's go.
All right, so Todd, just to kick this thing off, could you just walk us through this book and what this one's all about?
Yeah, sure. So before I even start, I got to thank you guys for letting me do this. As a debut author, it is very interesting to see how difficult it is to get eyes on your work. It doesn't matter the merit of the work. I feel like at some point, just to get this out there and let people judge it on their own. So thank you for letting me do this and doing that. To get back to the question, yeah, it's a fictional town, Ravens Cross, Virginia, and this is a Southern Gothic psychological thriller. It has some horror elements. It's basically a podcaster coming back to his hometown to do a story on something that really affected him in his childhood and is swept away by some of the small town politics and other things that are going on that he really didn't foresee being part of his story. But because he's swept away in this wave, he's just caught up in it and really trying to stay afloat and help those people that really need help. And it examines a lot of times throughout the story, it examines this idea of what you see may not necessarily be the truth. I wanted to give it a little bit of that small town feel, but also things that people have experienced no matter where they are in the world.
I love this. I love everything about this. This is amazing. I want to ask about the small town feel because, I grew up in a small town. A lot of our listeners have. But how does that kind of influence the story? What's like the role of the small town aspect?
Yeah, I think the small town, the rural idea in America, especially, is this people are forgiven based on what clique they belong to, not necessarily because of what has happened or not happened. So I think that especially happens in smaller towns, and it's this idea too that all walks of life live in rural America. We tend to think so, for instance, neurodivergent or LGBTQ. That's like an urban thing. It's not, in this small Americana situation. And that's not the case at all. So I think I wanted to get people to come to the realization that there are all walks of life everywhere, but the small town politics and who is considered an outsider, whether that's geographically coming in or as a marginalized person, how that affects people's behavior and who is pointed at or who is forgiven for certain things.
And it's funny because before we started recording, we were actually talking about the book Jaws and how the small town aspect is a big part of that book. And it's really stripped out a lot in the actual movie. But we see glimpses here and there of how, the good old boy network, the lifers, the townies, and the influence they kind of have over someone who's out of towner, you're not from around here kind of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, my family and I moved into a very small town in Virginia, and that's kind of where we get this idea, the Southern Gothic and all of that. And we were welcomed. It's amazing how friendly everyone is here. But that's not necessarily the case in all small towns. So, it's a give and take a little bit, I guess, depending on where you are. But we want to make sure that I kind of hold up a mirror to people in all towns to kind of look at themselves and think about how welcoming are they to others.
Exactly. Now, as you mentioned, this is your debut book, and we love speaking to new authors.
Mhm.
Where did the idea for this story come from, and how long did it take to finally finish it?
Not to sound like a prodigy, but it took about 10 weeks. And it was not because I'm good at what I do. I'm still learning quite a bit. It's because I was so pissed off and I was so passionate about it, what I was angry about, and that is the treatment of marginalized people, the negative treatment and the stigma attached to being a marginalized person for really no reason. And it was snowballing, and I just felt like I had to, in a way, to be almost cathartic, to just write something. I'm a huge, like everyone else probably on the planet, Stephen King, Mike Flanagan, Paul Tremblay. I love all of their work. So I started thinking about the different ways they've told stories and thought, is there a way to tell a story reminiscent of what they have done, but flip it on its side? For instance, what if Pennywise was good? Like, what happens if what we thought Pennywise, and I know he's not good, but in a different world, what if what we thought of Pennywise was actually the opposite, and it was through our eyes that we made him horrible, and then we find out the opposite. How would we change our minds? How would we react to that? So that's kind of what I was thinking about doing, and I was literally, obviously, I don't have hair. I literally wrote like my hair was on fire every day. Get up early in the morning, sit down, my coffee, and just rock and roll.
I love the idea of Pennywise being good. And Jason Voorhees, he just wants a hug,
Yeah,
everyone.
exactly.
He just
That's all
wants
he
to
wants
play the
entire time.
campground.
Forget the balloon. He wants his balloon back, and he wants a hug.
So,
Totally. He's
so
trying to get his
misunderstood.
10,000 steps in
So
every day.
misunderstood. And Freddy Krueger, he just wants to hang out. He just wants a pal. That's it.
Yeah.
He wants to
yeah,
like high five
yeah.
you.
Totally. Totally.
Also, 10 weeks, dude.
10 weeks.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting it's interesting what anger does in a way, or passion. And there's a thin line, I think, between being incredibly passionate and then it turning into something negative like anger. But I couldn't, it just flowed. And then I've written the conclusion to this duology, and it's just sitting on my computer right now. And I was telling my wife, like, this is a lot harder than the first time because I was so possessed and motivated. And then now there's potential expectations and how am I going to arc this and how is this going to come into play? I actually had to think, whereas before it was like I felt almost.
So, Todd, you're writing like your hair was on fire. That's a very interesting image. And speaking of images, we were talking a lot while we were going into this interview, prepping for it, about how awesome the title for this thing is.
Mm.
So, where'd you come up with the idea of When Shadows Burn for the title? Did you have to go through several iterations of that, or was that something that just came to you?
I had an idea, and this may sound bananas. I didn't really know where the story was going to end. So I kind of let the characters decide where it was going and how it was going to end. And then as I was getting close to that climax, I was looking at different psychology theories on why certain people behave or think the way they do, and stumbled across a theory or a phenomenon that has to do with shadows and people living in the shadows and all, their id and ego. I thought this makes sense. It just fit. So I went with that, and fortunately, it stuck. I didn't have to go through a lot of iterations. And not every person, a lot of people say the same thing. They're like, "Wow, that's a great title," and I guess, lucked out with it.
And so, was this the same way with the cover art? Because I got to tell you, the other part of this book, and no one's really seen this thing yet. It's quite like, I don't know how to describe it. So we've got a silhouette of what looks to be some sort of an individual, and you look in more detail at that silhouette, and you've got like, looks like, I don't know if that's an explosion happening or a tree, just the way that's shaded, like the eyes are kind of burning through the words there. And then you've got the house in the background, you've got the silhouette of all the figures standing in front of the house, they're looking at it, and it looks like they're on fire. It's just wild. Like, how did this come together?
The book has a Stand By Me feel to some degree because it is these kind of oddity misfit kind of people that shouldn't maybe be together, but they are, and they're in this together, even though they may not want to be. And I wanted the book when I was speaking with the Kohler artists. I was speaking to them saying, I want it to come across one way when you just pick it up. But then when you really look at it, you start to see the layers because that's really reminiscent of the story, is kind of a mosaic. There's a lot more going on than you realize by just the initial cursory look. And they did an incredible job.
And of course, we have to talk about the Scott house. This is like the main character in the story almost. Without giving us any spoilers, Todd, what is the Scott house? What's the story behind this?
Yeah, so the Scott House is a beautiful old mansion back in the 20s that was owned by a married couple, a husband and a child bride, actually, that were very wealthy, had done very well for themselves in banking and maybe some other shady deals. The stock market crash comes, it affects everybody in a little different way. Didn't go so well for the family living there. The wife suddenly disappears. The husband can't handle it anymore. And then there's chaos kind of ensues, if you want to call it that. And then as the years pass, it just falls down and gets dilapidated. And I tried to make it as a Southern Gothic. I wanted the house to almost feel and look like it was angry at the town for judging the town judging the actual structure and the people that live there. Because we find out what happened in the house really may not be what really the reality of it was. And then the other thing too is I wanted the house to be something that you look at and think one thing, but in reality, it's something totally different without getting into spoilers.
I love it. I love it. Did this? Were there any places that you happened to come across, living where you are, that made you think, "Yep, that's the house I want to do"?
There's a house right down the street, yeah, and we call it Cruella's house, Cruella de Vil. It's beautiful, but it is way up on a hill. It's massive. There's a lot of trees around it. It's haunted mansion feeling, but for no reason. But you walk by it and you're like, that's beautiful, but I don't know if I'd want to go in there. So it's kind of that feel. And I can see it from my office window. So I think, it was always there. It's just always there. And that really drove my vision of the Scott house.
You always see the houses when you're around, and you think, "Yep, haunted, definitely haunted. Beautiful place, but definitely haunted."
Yep. Yeah. And the house I live in, or the house we live in, I should say, was built in the year 1900. And so it's been refurbished, but it is a lot of old bones. We had a fire in here before we bought the house years and years before. So our railing of our stairway, everyone, when they see it, or the staircase, is always like, oh, the staining is amazing. And it's actually from the flames that burned up the staircase and just burned the wood in a way that structurally it's fine, but it just looks amazing. And I can still smell the smoke in our room off and on throughout the year. And that's always a little weird, to think, what the hell's happening here?
Yeah, that's a little creepy. All right. Well, then let us distract ourselves from that creepiness by talking about the town of Ravens Cross, which is a great name, by the way, for a town. I love that name. What happens to the town after what happens with the Scott house? How does that kind of just reverberate into the community?
I think you just hit it on the head. It reverberates, and it is whisper down the lane. How quickly the game we play in elementary school, the telephone, where I say something, we pass it down the line, and by the time it gets down to the other end, it's a totally different story. And that's something I wanted to examine in the book itself, was how responsible are we as individuals for what is being portrayed or what is being talked about? Like, how much are we contributing to the BS that we shouldn't be it's so much easier to get caught up in the juiciness of gossip than to back up and go, hold on a second, that doesn't make any sense. And especially today in the world of social media, how quickly that can spread, and then we go, into misinformation, disinformation. So I think that's really a big point for me, was that something happened. I think this is what happened, so I'm going to tell someone else what I think, and then it's going to just take a life of its own.
I'm really interested in learning more about who Timothy Michaels is and what draws him to the Scott House.
Yeah, so he was from Ravenscross initially, and as we all have experienced in one way or another growing up, we were maybe a little bit of an outsider, not the cool kid. Wanted to fit in, and gets dared to go into the house because it's quote unquote haunted, and you need to go in and prove that you're cool, or you're tough, by going in and taking something from the house. And when he goes in, he has this experience really, really upset him. And he's carried it with him his whole life. And now as an adult, he's like, you know what? I'm going to come back as this famous podcaster. I'm going to come back and I'm going to do a show and talk about what happened. But I'm also kind of going to dispel it and go, listen, I was a kid, and it just doesn't go that way. That's really the root of Tim and his as his character and his motivation even to return to Ravenscross.
Ugh, a podcaster. They're the worst. Isn't that right, Curtis? They are just terrible.
So that's one of the running jokes through the book is anytime podcaster, or hey, this is a famous podcaster, anytime that's brought up, people in the town, because it's a small town, are like, I don't even know if anybody listens to podcasts, or are those even a thing anymore? Like, that's kind of like the joke. And he's like, yeah, okay. Anyway.
Brings up a good point. How much does he actually believe in the story?
I think he's scared to death that the possibility of what he saw and experienced is real. I don't think he really believes one way or the other, but I think the thought of it actually being real is what he's scared of more so than what happened. Because then that opens up a whole can of worms, right? Like, we all of a sudden experience something and then find out it's real, even though it shouldn't be and doesn't make sense. So now I have to change my mindset and look at things totally different. And that's tough for people to have an open mind. So I think that's part of his fear, is that it actually was real. And he wants to come back and prove that it wasn't, so that he's right. I don't have to worry about anything.
All right, folks. Well, we have been talking all about the story. Now, we're going to give you all a little glimpse as to what lies in store, because we're going to be playing for you an excerpt from the audiobook out later this year, voiced by the amazing Emily Wuzeller. And before we do that, Todd, who is Emily? How did the two of you get connected?
Emily Wuzeller is an audiobook narrator that's basically, I say this all the time, she's basically won as many of every award that you possibly can. She is a golden voice. She's an Audi winner, multiple golden microphone, I think 20 some odd times. She's an incredible person, but she's also a member of the queer community. And because of some of the themes within the book, I wanted to involve the right people to have an opportunity and to get to be part of this. Plus, it lends to this theme so much. It just made sense. So we hooked up a while back, and she's been fantastic to work with. And I'm really, really excited about hearing the entire book from Emily.
Excellent. All right, folks. So sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Prologue. Almost a century before the famous podcaster Timothy Michaels returned to Ravenscross, an old mansion cast its gloomy gaze over the small town. Hank Scott stood by his expansive bedroom window, hands trembling as he stared into the growing twilight. This particular year, autumn had arrived early, wrapping the town in brilliant shades of intense reds and amber. Yet Hank felt none of its remaining warmth. A chill soaked into his bones, which had nothing to do with the changing season. Perched upon a rotting fence post, a single raven stared at him. Its deep, coal-black eyes seemed to cut into Hank's soul. Ravens, he knew from old stories, carried spirits burdened with unfinished business, laden with regret, resentment, and sorrow. To Hank, the bird understood every shadow lurking in his heart as it tilted its head slightly, mocking his anguish. Hank shivered, his gaze shifting as he turned toward the interior of his once grand home. Layered with a thick blanket of neglect, time had not been gentle.
Okay, we are back, and damn, Todd, you did not oversell this at all. She is amazing. And I gotta say, I'm an avid audiobook listener, so I am gonna be pre-ordering this thing because I definitely want to hear the rest. But moving on, I want to ask a bit about your own background, specifically your own interest in like the horror and thriller genres. Like, what kind of writers do you really prefer to check out?
I like people that make you laugh. You know, the dark humor aspect in horror sometimes is left out, and I think that by creating a bigger range from a little bit of humor to some just absolute terror, it invigorates me as a reader because I can read something and go, "Oh, I get it. I would react that way," or not everything is serious all the time, and I feel like where I'm going with my follow up, and then a third one I'm already starting to work on is the ultimate horror is something that shouldn't be happening, but is. So I want it to be grounded. And yes, it's fiction, but I want people to go, you know what? I've seen that, or I can relate to that, or I've heard that, or I've read that somewhere else in the news and think about it in a different way than just, Art the Clown. Love Terrifier and Art and all that. But the fact of the matter is, I'm not worried about Art. I might be worried about the person down the street. And that's where I think I feel like I sit.
Also, fucking clowns, man. They are just terrifying.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't know. I'm gonna push back, and clowns have just never bothered. I don't know why. Clowns have just never bothered me. I don't know what it is, but I mean, maybe it's roots with John Wayne Gacy or something. I don't
Could
know.
be. Definitely Pennywise, of course,
Yeah, of course, of
Yep.
course.
Um,
Yeah.
There was actually something in the news. This person was just like standing outside people's homes and they're dressed like as a clown and just like waving to them creepily. And it's went on for like weeks and months. And like people were like, who is this person? What's going on? Of course, there were copycats and it became a thing
Of
for a
course.
while.
Yeah. Huh.
But Todd, back to books. What, in your opinion, makes a really good horror story? What keeps you reading on, turning those pages?
I think the why, not necessarily the what is happening, but why is it happening? And how are the characters going to deal with, how are they going to resolve it? I think that there's a very, very important place for horror that doesn't end well. I think the Hollywood ending, that kind of, oh, we're all happy, even though maybe somebody was lost during the story. I think there's value in that. I think there's a lot of value in not being a clean ending and everything just getting wrapped up. I'm going to say this, and I have people that will yell at me about this. I never was a fan of open endings. Just never was. I was like, I just read this 400-page book. Tell me what happens. But now that I'm getting old, maybe because I don't know, I don't have the energy to think too much. I like it. I don't know. I don't want to, maybe let me back up. I don't want to be told. I want to think about, did that really happen? I want to doubt what I just read, and I want to doubt myself to dig deeper and start to think about some things. So I think that's important.
I agree because I like an ending where you think, maybe it's not quite over yet. I like that there's a possibility of like, of course, a sequel. We always love that.
Sure.
But I like the idea you think, oh, it's over. It's finally over. But no, it really isn't.
Yeah. I read Paul Tremblay's Head Full of Ghosts, and that book, I recommend that book to every person. I'm the random person that'll walk up and be like, hey, you didn't read this book. I should get a kickback for this. But that book just blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Just what I finished and thought, what the hell just happened? What did I read? What just happened? And I think there's so much ground that can be covered and needs to be covered in that way. Katrina Ward's Last House on Needless Street, that, wait, the entire story, this is what I thought. And then now this, and then it opens up again, like Tim Michaels, it opens up this whole new world that I have to renegotiate what I just read and what I believed. I think there's so much value in that.
And we should just say this: Paul Tremblay is a goddamn legend. Seriously.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. No, I agree. You know, and the other author that I've loved, and especially his book Hex, Thomas Huveld, Hex. Oh, again, that was another one that I sit down. I've read a couple of times, and I finish and think, oh my gosh, like it really makes me think. It throws you right in to start with, and I remember reading it the first time, going, I don't know. But as it got further into it, I just got sucked in, and then the ending is just what? So yeah.
Yeah, I think it all depends too on how the story is being written or how it's being portrayed too. Because I mean, my own type of personality, I don't mind open endings as long as I kind of know there's going to be more to it. It helps to, like, you know, maybe for a second or third book or open up another arc. But I always like closure, especially if I get in. You know what I mean? So I do feel that, like, I get to that point where it's like, okay, where's the payoff? I've invested X amount of time into reading it, you know?
Yeah. And that's interesting too, because I always wonder, as a writer, I always think about, would I rather not land the plane the correct way or the right closure and just do it because there is closure? Or is it, should I leave it open and then you know, I don't know if that's a lose-lose, win-win, you know, it's funny. I really learned a lot by writing, because it becomes a lot more difficult to criticize what I'm reading after I've written something and understand the difficulty people go through to write. I mean, how many times I went back and like, oh shit, okay, what's that person's name? It's in my own book, and I forgot that character's name, and I need to make sure this timeline is lining up. I think that I think there's value in both, for sure, open and closed endings. But yeah, it's personal taste, which is the beauty of reading.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that you are going to stick with this genre, this path that we're going down, or do you think there's other genres you might want to try them in the future?
Well, if somebody buys the book, I'll probably stick with it. I don't know. My genre is going, I'm at this point today, right now, I am sticking with the psychological horror under the umbrella of social justice. I think there's a lot to write about when it comes to the treatment of people that have severe mental illness. I think the marginalized community, LGBTQ, you know, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of ground, like I said before, to be covered that for whatever reason isn't being covered, or it's not being covered the right way. And I am fortunate, and very fortunate, I have a trans son. So he's a sensitivity reader for me. And that's kind of the root of this entire thing, entire novel, is the horror that he lives every day as a child, as a teenager. He's 18. And what he has to be worried about, and what kind of reactions he may have or he encounters just because he wants to be himself, and the judgment that is thrown on him, and people hate him that have never met him. He's a sweet little kid, you know, and just leave him alone, kind of thing. So that's social justice, that idea of real people, real dealing with real horror. I don't need to have some ghost flying around. I don't need to have some terrible creature. I think society can be a terrible creature in itself.
I will just say, at least, you know, Pennywise, Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, they're honest. You get there's no double talk with them. You know exactly what they want to do, murder you, but they're honest about it.
Well, and you can see them coming.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. You know,
there is like the fan theory that Jason can teleport. I'm not sure if he actually can, but it seems to be a fan theory.
Yeah, well, then there's that.
I mean, how does a guy that big get across a room with no one seeing him?
That is
fucking
very
teleportation,
true.
guys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally.
So I got to skip around in the formatting here a little bit, because I just want to know, being a new writer, getting the book out there, getting eyes on this, what's the strategy? What are you going to be doing? You know, not only after our program, but beyond. Like, you got appearances lined up. What's in the works for you?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I have one appearance. I have reached out to about 1 billion bookstores who have don't want anything to do with me because I am new. So it's basically nobody knows who you are. Nobody knows that you have a history of sales or whatever it may be. So a lot of times, we live in a society in which money talks. So am I going to buy X amount of books and have you come out and do all this at an event and one person show up and I don't sell any books? Now I've got all these sitting on my shelf. So it's a give and take. So it's really trying to sell yourself and show people, hey, listen, just read the book. Just, what, again, merit based, read the book. If you don't like it, cool. If you do, hey, I'm willing to go anywhere, everywhere. And I've had some very interesting experiences with bookstores, both good and bad, with influencers and things. I'm old, so I'm like, oh my gosh, what do you mean? Somebody on Instagram is going to be the one that blows my book up, right? Like, what seriously, I didn't know that. So it's a whole different world. And thankfully, Books Forward, that I have as a marketing agency, is they're doing a fantastic, fantastic job that I don't know the ins and outs. I'm a PhD, but I know what I don't know, and this is what I don't know. So I have to have help. So yeah, I'm trying to do as many interviews. I've got a bunch of guest articles coming out for different organizations and different places. I know I was fortunate that Bloody Disgusting did a feature, things like that, where people can go, oh, these people have vetted this guy, so he's not maybe he's halfway decent. So then that gives me a little street cred. So that's kind of where I'm at this point.
How do you think you would do at a convention? Like if you were to go to like a book festival or a Comic-Con, because a lot of, like new writers go there, especially if they're in like the horror genre, the fantasy, the sci-fi. But how do you think you kind of handle yourself in that kind of situation?
Well, I'm on the spectrum, so it'd probably freak me out.
Yep.
No. To be honest, I do speak in front of however many thousand people when my day job, so I'm used to doing those kinds of things. I was always raised as I was raised as someone that believes there's not a lot to say for a man who says it himself, which is the polar opposite of trying to sell yourself in the book and talk about yourself. I'm not much into that. So that's a hurdle and something that I have to figure out how to get over. And you've got to have thick skin, right? I This idea of I go out to a convention, I sit there at a table and no one walks by and you don't sell a book, and then it's like, what does that do for your self confidence? I'm in a way, I'm a little fortunate. I played professional baseball, so I know what it's like to suck and be booed by lots of people, and you just kind of go along with it. It's still tough, and like you said, there's so many people. You're like, oh, I'm going to write a book, and this is going to be great, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, my book's being released with 2,000 other books on the same day. How the hell am I supposed to stand out? The name of the book, the cover, a couple of quotes and blurbs and things like that, hopefully, are enough to get people at least interested in opening the book and seeing what it's about.
Exactly. Now, one thing we've talked about, and I want to dive a little more into this, is the authentic queer representation through your book. How is this done, and what's the importance to you?
It's important to me because of my son. I mean, that's just to be overly reductive. I think it's more important to the community at large because there isn't a lot of queer or neurodivergent representation, especially in Southern Gothics. It's easy to erase people when they've never appeared, right? So we want to make sure that these marginalized communities they're represented in just everyday stories. And I've really, really focused on not including or writing or building a queer character because they're queer. They are a character in the story that happens to be queer. That's just who they are. It doesn't define them by any means. And I didn't want them to be a caricature. Like I always mess this up. The Vince Vaughn movie, is it? I think Freaky, where he swaps bodies. He's a serial killer or whatever. They have a queer character in that movie that's fantastic, but he is almost written again as a punchline instead of a character that is fantastic that just happens to be queer. I think that's important to just show that we have people that are neurodivergent or queer that do love, do hate, do get scared, do have funny conversations, and are just human beings. and try to normalize that, because that really is what is happening, in our world today.
Mhm. I like the idea what you're talking about of a character who just happens to be queer. It's
Mhm.
not the queer character. It's no the character who happens to be queer, and there's no explanation because they shouldn't have to make one. This reminds me of a comic series that I'll talk about endlessly if anyone lets me, called Giant Days. And there's a character who is gay, but there's more to her than that, and there's never that episode or that issue where she has to explain, oh, this is why. It's just there, she's gay, and that's it.
Yeah,
And I think
yeah,
that's
yeah.
beautiful. It's how
I
it
don't,
should be done.
I don't want to read a character and then find out their sexuality, which, to be honest, unless that drives the narrative a little bit or something, who
Yeah,
gives a shit? But
exactly.
would it help if all of a sudden I was like, well, I'm gay now? Like, does that help the story? Or is that just the person? You know what I mean? You have to really weigh these things out. And it also, because my son really helped me read through things and look at it through the eyes of someone in that community, to think about how they view microaggressions that I don't even see. I'm a cishet white guy, that I never have to worry about that kind of stuff. So as I write something, to be able to go, yeah, that's a little sketchy, or I don't know how much somebody in this category would react in that way. So, I just try to write, overall, I try to write people. That's it. I'm just writing people, and whatever happens to those people helps drive the story and see where it goes.
Let's talk about that, because with a horror story, it can be easy for your characters to be just cannon fodder. They're there to
Mhm.
die, and that's it, and no one gives a shit. But
Yeah.
how do you make your characters matter?
I think you make them matter by making them relatable. How many times have we watched a horror movie or read a book and some character does something and you're like, what the fuck? Nobody would do that. Why are you, that kind of thing. I think I really tried to write the characters as, first of all, there's characteristics in people that I've interacted with or known over my life that are either funny or goofy, whatever it may be. But also, if I was faced and my family was faced with this, how would we react? And I would rather write it authentically that way than make it so far fetched to drive the story. I'd rather it be a little mundane and then figure other ways out to move the arc than to just do it to do it, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I want everyone to be relatable. I want somebody to read a character or every character and go, I know that guy. I've went to school with that guy, like that kind of thing. And I think that helps people care about the characters.
So, Todd, what got you writing in the first place?
I love writing. I've always loved writing. I've written nonfiction, scientific papers and things like that. I write for a social justice magazine. They're Aware Now is amazing. They allow me to just get pissed off about something and Andy Rooney it and just write something, and then they publish it. It's so great. I was the epitome of the didn't apply himself in school, and I was an absolute jackass in school. I was terrible. I had a teacher in seventh grade, which is part of my dedication, that pulled me aside and said, you will never amount to anything. That was her words of wisdom to me.
Wow.
And I actually took that to heart, not believing it, but wanting to prove something. And this is something I've always wanted to do, never had maybe the time to do it or the proper motivation or whatever it may be, but those pieces fell into place. I think writing is so wonderful because it's your world. You can do what you want. If people don't like it, that's okay. It's fun to me. So it's always been there. It's just a matter of the universe allowing it to happen, if you want to call it that.
Is that kind of like a special skill or just sort of like mentality, a trait that you had to develop? Could we, over the course of this interview, it got me thinking, we've talked about a couple of things now where you're like, I got really, really upset and really mad and angry. And I was able to channel that anger and that energy into, this motivation and focus to be able to bang out this book in like lightning speed, and now we're just hearing another story here about being told in seventh grade that you're not going to amount to nothing, but you're going to take that and you're going to channel that through. Is that something that just always came naturally to you, or did you have to learn that?
I've always been, oh yeah, fuck you person. I've always been that kind of person, and to a fault. And thankfully, my wife is. I've been married to her for 30 years, so she is at this point contractually obligated to like me. But she has helped me an enormous amount to calm down and to think before I open my mouth. So that's always been in me as an athlete. My father was a professional athlete, so that competitive "I'm going to show you" has always been there. But from a writing standpoint, it's such a different world writing fiction. That is something I'm still an absolute novice at. And I'm going to lean on Stephen King here. And he basically, and I'll paraphrase, that everybody can go from an average writer to a good writer with practice and learning, but very few people can go from good to great. That's a talent more than a skill. And I can totally see that. I just read Silvia Moreno Garcia's Bewitching. I wish I could write like that. I wish I could write like Truman Capote, but I will never. But through time and effort and desire, I'm hoping I can hone the craft a little better than what I'm doing now.
It's like the old saying goes, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's what it is. And I think part of that practice is understanding that sometimes you're going to put just absolute shit stain on paper, and that's okay. It's a process.
Your first draft is not going to nail it. You're going to have to revise it. You're going to have to go with like a writing group and an editor, because this is how you get better and you learn.
Yeah.
And then your next book is way better as a result.
Yeah. And it's interesting how often there's two things that my wife really helped me with. One is her reading what was on the paper and not what was in my head. So she's like, "What the hell are you talking about here?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay. So I had it in my brain. I just didn't put it on the paper the right way." That was really, really important. The other thing is her just view as someone from the total outside that's never written. There's value in people that don't have a background in this. There's sometimes it's not so good, but the value of that, right, is like, hey, listen, this is what you're doing. It just doesn't work for me as a novice reader or a non-writer reader, if you want to call it that. That really, really helps.
As if writing a book wasn't hard enough, right? When there's these general like standards of rules with writing that may work for a lot of different folks and are effective, and others, with neurodivergent may not necessarily be able to, they have to adapt and things like that. Was there any sort of challenges or adaptations that you had to make with either writing at any point in your life to help you kind of overcome like stumbling blocks or anything like that?
Yeah, first of all, autism is my superpower. So it is very awesome in a way to be able to just like lock in, and I don't eat. All of a sudden, what the hell? What time is it? That there's value in that. I think the biggest thing for me is I was locked into nonfiction and kind of sciency writing for so long. And that's incredibly structured and word count. And you really have to say to a T what you mean, what you say, and you say what you mean. Whereas in fiction, you can, I don't want to say fluff it, but you can let it breathe. And that's something early on that my wife would read my stuff and go, "You don't need to tell this entire passage in 3 paragraphs. You could do like 5 pages. Like, open it up. What am I seeing? What am I smelling? All that." And as a matter of fact, that helps me. It helps me watch TV or movies now in a different way of thinking about the breadth of the work. I don't know if you're familiar with Hell Motel. It was on Paramount. We just started watching this series. Whatever, good, bad, different, doesn't matter. I thought about it today. We watched a couple, one wakes up and the other had been murdered. And she wakes up and she's like, "Did you hear that?" And kind of this whole thing, and turns over and sees that her wife has been murdered. Terrible, no spoiler, whatever. I thought, why in TV and books do you not smell it? Like instead of going, "What was that sound?" Go, "What the hell is that smell?" And then you roll over and you're like, "Holy shit, she's been gutted." That smells. So it's things like that were the stumbling blocks for me, is really sensory descriptions were really something I had to start to slow down and think about.
All right. Well, folks, we are coming down to the end of this conversation, but, Todd, as a debut writer, as someone who's now in this world, I want to ask your advice for the listeners, because out there, somewhere, there is someone who has an idea for a book, but doesn't want to write it. They think they can't do it or aren't sure where to begin. What's your advice for someone who is in that predicament?
I don't have any advice, and I say that because the advice I'm going to give is George R. R. Martin, and he says read shitty books because that gives you the understanding that you can do it too. Do watch terrible movies and go, you know what, I can do that. And that was part of what spawned my book, was recognizing what was happening in society, seeing the world through my son's eyes, and going, you know what, I just read something or I just watched something that was kind of garbage to me. I think I could do that, and just started trying. And that's it. You'll never do it if you don't do it, right? I think that's just having the courage to write for yourself first, and then you can write for everyone else. I think that's important.
What was the most difficult part of writing this book?
Oh gosh, writing it for a community that I'm not part of. I think that is, and thank goodness I have my son, but I wanted to tell stories that needed to be told, but I'm not in the group. So I didn't want to, I don't want this to be like, when I speak, like I'm at the appearance I'm gonna have at a bookstore. I'm gonna have a lot of the queer community there. Awesome. And it's like, oh, finally, this white cishet man gets to have a chance to speak to everyone. I get those opportunities to do that. How can I do that authentically in a group that I'm not part of? I think that was the hardest part. I think the second hardest part is I have a horrific scene that really examines the reader's belief as to who is the bad person in the book. And the hardest part was to not just write that scene for like 100 pages, because I enjoyed the just brutality of it. That was tough to stop that, because I was like, this is so much fun. But yeah, I think really coming down to it is writing something authentic for a population that I'm not part of, and having them really gravitate and go, you hit it on the head. And hopefully I have.
And of course, at what point did you have that aha light bulb moment where, when shadows burn, I need to write this. This needed to happen.
I will. So my foreword, my author's note, I said that I had something that really got under my skin. And I literally, so exclusive, it was a movie. I will not bash the movie, but I watched it and I was so mad that the source material was butchered so bad. I was like, I'm gonna write something better than what I just watched. I'm gonna do something a little better than what I saw. And I started writing. And I didn't even tell my wife I was writing until I was about 100 pages in, because she was gonna be like, what the hell are you doing now, you lunatic? And then when I wanted to test myself to see if I'd actually follow through, but it just happened because of being disappointed and angry.
And Todd, as we bring this thing to a close, the big question for the listeners, what's next?
So I have finished. So this is a duology, which I didn't know it was going to be until I finished it. And then I thought, you know what? There's some unanswered questions. There are some things that needed to be fleshed out a little bit more. And I will tell you that the end of the duology, the conclusion of the Raven's Cross series, if you want to, or duology, you want to call it that, within the first 15 pages, there is a spoiler that will shock all of it reframes the entire first book. And I think that there was more story to be told for these characters. And I will tell you this, when it comes to true crime, whose story is it to tell? That's kind of what I'm falling back on, is when these stories are told, what does it do to the families victims to have to relive it? And also people that may not have been involved, but it's their town or their neighbor. How does that impact those people? And that's kind of where I was going with the second book. So yeah, that's next. And then I have a third one that I am about 3,000 words into that is about a serial killer being covered in the news. And it's I'll give you this. It is a alternating chapter, a male writer and a female writer. And the female writer is going to be written by a different author. So we're going to have alternating viewpoints of the same thing, but two different authors. So that's where we're going at this point.
That is a cool concept. I love that. That is really, really cool. Well, folks, you've heard everything. Now, here's what we're going to tell you next. This book is out on October 14th, so just a little bit away. It's right around the corner. You go to toddbrownwrites.net. You'll find everything there. Get your copy, leave reviews, leave comments. We love to hear this stuff. And Todd, as always, thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. Again, I cannot thank you enough for allowing me to ramble on about all this stuff. And great questions. And again, thank you for your time.
Thanks for listening to this episode. And please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. It ensures you never miss an episode and helps our ranking, allowing others to discover the podcast more easily.
If you really liked it, please share it with a friend and join our Citywide Blackout Facebook community, along with following us on Instagram at CitywideMax and at Citywide Interviews.
I'm your host, Max Bowen.
And I'm Curtis Hughes.
And we'll see you all next time.